Welcome to Searching the Scriptures. Our Bible teacher will be Gunther von Harringa Sr. In this series of studies, we will be focusing on the book of Judges. Without further ado, let's look into God's Word, the Bible.
Good evening and welcome to Searching the Scriptures. This is going to be part number 5 of Judges chapter 2. And we are going to read verses 18 and 19 of Judges 2. And when Jehovah raised them up judges, then Jehovah was with the judge, and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For it repented Jehovah because of their groanings, by reason of them that oppressed them and vexed them. And it came to pass, when the judge was dead, that they returned and corrupted themselves more than their fathers, in following other gods to serve them, and to bow down unto them. They cease not from their own doings, nor from their stubborn way. Again, we see in this passage this cycle of rebellion, oppression, deliverance, and rest. And it's really encapsulated in these two particular verses, because it talks about the fact that God raised up the judge and used the judge to deliver them out of the hand of those that oppressed them. But then, when the judge died, they went right back to their old ways, and then God had to bring judgment again, and the cycle continues. Now, the phrase here in verse 18, and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies. Let's take a look at this for a little bit. It's actually comprised of 3 Hebrew words. And delivered, which is Strong's number 3467. Them out of the hand, Strong's number 3027. And of their enemies, Strong's number 341. And these 3 words appear in 4 verses besides here in Judges 2:18, and we'll just look at a couple of them. They are both in the Psalms. One is verse 7 of Psalm 138, 6 through 8. Though Jehovah be high, yet hath he respect unto the lowly, but the proud he knoweth afar off. Though I walk in the midst of trouble, thou wilt revive me. Thou shalt stretch forth thine hand against the wrath of mine enemies, and thy right hand shall save me. Jehovah will perfect that which concerneth me. Thy mercy, O Jehovah, endureth forever. Forsake not the works of thine hands. Also, if we go to verse 10 of Psalm 106, 6 through 15, we find in much of this psalm, if not all of the psalm, the rebellion of Israel historically, and of course God's faithful deliverance over and over again. Again, this is Psalm 106, 6 through 15, and verse 10 is the one where we find these 3 Hebrew words together. We have sinned with our fathers. We have committed iniquity. We have done wickedly. Our fathers understood not thy wonders in Egypt. They remembered not the multitude of thy mercies, but provoked him at the sea, even at the Red Sea. Nevertheless, he saved them for his name's sake, that he might make his mighty power to be known. He rebuked the Red Sea also, and it was dried up. So he led them through the depths, as through the wilderness. And he saved them from the hand of him that hated them, and redeemed them from the hand of the enemy. And the waters covered their enemies, that there was not one of them left. Then believed they his words, they sang his praise, they soon forgat his works, they waited not for his counsel, but lusted exceedingly in the wilderness, and tempted God in the desert. And he gave them their request, but sent leanness into their soul. There's an attitude here that we see of spiritual opportunism that reminds us of Pharaoh himself, whose heart became increasingly hardened, even as God said he would do to Pharaoh. And he became very embittered in spite of God's mercy in stopping each one of the plagues when Pharaoh asked for that. And yet, under the guise of being somewhat repentant, he went right back to what he was doing before. He did not let the people go, just as God had told Moses. And in fact, God said, not until I bring the last plague is he going to let you go. And the last plague was the death of the firstborn. And Pharaoh's firstborn son on the throne died, and that was the last straw. And he let them go, but of course we know that that didn't last long, because immediately afterwards he took his whole army, one of the greatest armies on the face of the earth, and went after the Israelites and eventually caught up with them at the Red Sea. The phrase in Judges 2:18, for it repented Jehovah because of their groanings, by reason of them that oppressed them and vexed them. This first part of this phrase has these two words, for it repented the Lord, or Jehovah. And we find these two terms together in about 40 verses. The first word, for it repented, which is Strong's number 5162, is translated four different ways in the Old Testament. Comfort, 57 times. Repent, 41 times. Comforter, 9 times. And ease, once. And it's the kind of word which we frequently find in the Bible where it has a positive meaning as well as a negative meaning. And the thing we need to keep in mind when we read this is that God, contrary to what some of the verses might suggest, he doesn't change his mind, because he does everything after the counsel of his own will, as we read in Ephesians 1:11. And we'll look at a few of these verses where we have these two words, Jehovah 30:68, and for it repented 51:62. A good example is God's displeasure in 1 Samuel 15:11 and 35, having to do with Saul, how the Israelites, they wanted an earthly king. They rejected God as their king, and that would have been a theocracy, a perfect political rule by God himself, which would have been ideal. And yet they wanted nothing to do with that. They wanted to be just like all the other nations, and they wanted an earthly king, even though God said and spelled out for them many problems that would arise because of this earthly king. We read, it repented me that I had set up Saul to be king, for he has turned back from following me and hath not performed my commandments. And it grieved Samuel, and he cried unto Jehovah all night. And Samuel came no more to see Saul until the day of his death. Nevertheless, Samuel mourned for Saul, and Jehovah repented that he had made Saul king over Israel. Also, if we go to 1 Chronicles 21:15, we discover that God's anger has certain limitations, and he contrasts that with his mercy. And God sent an angel unto Jerusalem to destroy it. And as he was destroying, Jehovah beheld, and he repented him of the evil, and said to the angel that destroyed, It is enough. Stay now thine hand. And the angel of Jehovah stood by the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. And that's very significant because of the fact that this particular threshing floor is where God commanded David to build an altar there and to offer sacrifices after the plague had stopped, right there in that very precise location. And as it turns out, that very precise location where he built the altar and offered sacrifices is the very same location where the foundation of Solomon's temple was laid, which David had a big hand in providing all the raw materials for that. And that was where the temple, Solomon's temple, was eventually finished and erected. And then if you fast forward to the time of the New Testament, we see that vicinity is where Christ hung on the cross. And not only did Christ hang on the cross, but if you go back earlier to the time of David, and even preceding David, maybe by 1,000 years or so, it's where Abraham sacrificed Isaac. And so the place, even though it doesn't hold any special significance, but spiritually, there's great significance because of the fact that Isaac was sacrificed there. The plague was stopped there. The foundation of the temple was laid, and Christ hung on the cross. And so the imagery is just wonderful how God arranged all of this to point. And of course, in talking about the cross, we have to keep in mind that it's really hearkening back to before the foundation of the world, which is where and when the atonement actually took place. All right, let's look at this next phrase in verse 18. Of their groanings by reason of them that oppress them and vex them, which again is comprised of these three Hebrew words, keeping in mind how we see God's patience and God's long suffering and God's love continually for his corporate people in spite of their wicked rebellion. And of course, we see this not only all throughout the book of Judges, but we see this all throughout the Bible. Now, the term of the groanings is Strong's number 5009, and it's only found 4 times, including here in Judges 2:18. And we're going to look at a couple passages in Exodus that deal with Israel's subjection and slavery during the time that they were in Egypt. Exodus 2:24 declares, and God heard their groaning. This is 5009. And God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. Excuse me. Likewise, if we go to Exodus 6:5, God repeats this. I have also heard the groaning of the children of Israel, whom the Egyptians keep in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. The next word, by reason of them that oppressed, is Strong's number 3905, and it's utilized 19 times. 4 of those times appear in the book of Judges, including here in our present verse. 5 times this term is also used in connection with Israel's bondage in Egypt. And we see this again in 1 Samuel 10:18. For example, we read, and said unto the children of Israel, thus saith Jehovah God of Israel, I brought up Israel out of Egypt, and delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hand of all kingdoms, and of them that oppressed you. Also, in Psalm 106, verse 42, this also acknowledges their rebellion, particularly in the book of Judges, as we've been noticing. Their enemies also oppressed them, and they were brought into subjection under their hand. The third word, them that vex them, Strong's number 1766, in this phrase, of their groanings by reason of them that oppress them and vex them, is only found in verse 8 of Joel 2, 1 through 11, which in the context it's translated as thrust. And this is really speaking about our present day as we are living in this prolonged day of judgment. Blow ye the trumpet in Zion, and sound an alarm in my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of Jehovah cometh. For it is nigh at hand, a day of darkness and of gloominess, a day of clouds and of thick darkness, as the morning spread upon the mountains, a great people and a strong. There hath not been ever the like, neither shall be any more after it, even to the years of many generations. A fire devoureth before them, and behind them a flame burneth. The land is as the garden of Eden before them, and behind them a desolate wilderness, yea, and nothing shall escape them. The appearance of them is as the appearance of horses, and as horsemen so shall they run. Like the noise of chariots on the tops of mountains shall they leap, like the noise of a flame of fire that devoureth the stubble, as a strong people set in battle array. Before their face the people shall be much pained, all faces shall gather blackness. They shall run like mighty men, they shall climb the wall like men of war, and they shall march every one on his ways, and they shall not break their ranks, neither shall one thrust. That is this word vexed. 1766, neither shall one thrust another. They shall walk every one in his path. And when they fall upon the sword, they shall not be wounded. They shall run to and fro in the city. They shall run upon the wall. They shall climb up upon the houses. They shall enter in at the windows like a thief. The earth shall quake before them. The heavens shall tremble. The sun and the moon shall be dark, and the stars shall withdraw their shining. And Jehovah shall utter his voice before his army, for his camp is very great. For he is strong that executeth his word. For the day of Jehovah is great and very terrible, and who can abide it? In verse 19, we read what happened whenever one of the judges died. They returned and corrupted themselves more than their fathers, in which God again stresses this ongoing cycle of rebellion, oppression, deliverance, and rest. And so, because we're approaching the end of this study, I want to focus on a word in this phrase that we have not previously considered, and this is this word, and corrupted. Strong's number 7843. And it appears 147 times, mostly as destroy, and to a lesser degree as corrupt. The following passages illustrate one of the ways that God presents this word in the Old Testament. And this is verses 16 to 21 of Deuteronomy 31. And here God reveals the following information to Moses, which we see being played out in the book of Joshua and to a greater degree in the book of Judges. This again is Deuteronomy 31, 16 to 21. And Jehovah said unto Moses, Behold, thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, and this people will rise up and go a-whoring after the gods of the strangers of the land, whither they go to be among them, and will forsake me, and break my covenant, which I have made with them. Then my anger shall be kindled against them in that day, and I will forsake them, and I will hide my face from them, and they shall be devoured. And many evils and troubles shall befall them, so that they will say in that day, Are not these evils come upon us, because our God is not among us? And I will surely hide my face in that day for all the evils which they shall have wrought, in that they are turned unto other gods. And he makes a very interesting statement in this next verse, in verse 19. Now therefore, write ye this song for you, and teach it to the children of Israel. Put it in their mouths, that this song may be a witness for me against the children of Israel. For when I shall have brought them into the land, which I swear unto their fathers, that floweth with milk and honey, and they shall have eaten and filled themselves and waxen fat, then will they turn unto other gods, and serve them, and provoke me, and break my covenant. And it shall come to pass, when many evils and troubles are befallen them, that this song shall testify against them as a witness. For it shall not be forgotten out of the mouths of their seed. For I know their imagination, which they go about even now, before I have brought them into the land which I swear. Then in verse 29 of Deuteronomy 31, 27 to 29, we find this word corrupt doubled up. It's actually stated as ye will utterly, which is the word corrupt, and then the word corrupt. And Moses is going to relay to the people what God had told him. And of course, spiritually, this is pointing to the end of the institutional churches and denominations. And we see this by the language in the latter days, and we know that that took place on May 21, 1988, at the start of the Great Tribulation. For I know thy rebellion and thy stiff neck. Behold, while I am yet alive with you this day, ye have been rebellious against Jehovah, and how much more after my death. Gather unto me all the elders of your tribes and your officers, that I may speak these words in their ears, and call heaven and earth to record against them. For I know that after my death ye will utterly corrupt yourselves, and turn aside from the way which I have commanded you, and evil will befall you in the latter days, because ye will do evil in the sight of Jehovah, to provoke him to anger through the work of your own hands. We want to keep in mind that the song that God had Moses write down as a memorial, as a witness to the Israelites, is Deuteronomy 32. And they were to rehearse in their hearing. They were to rehearse this to the nation every 7 years in the year of release, which, as Deuteronomy 15 explains, pictures the freedom from the bondage of sin that the gospel provides during the day of salvation. And they were to do this during the Feast of Tabernacles, according to verses 12 and 13 of Deuteronomy 31. Gather the people together, men and women and children, and thy stranger that is within thy gates, that they may hear, and that they may learn and fear Jehovah your God, and observe to do all the words of this law. And that their children, which have not known anything, may hear, and learn to fear Jehovah your God, as long as ye live in the land whither ye go over Jordan to possess it. This same word corrupt also appears in Deuteronomy 32 in verse 5, and there it's translated as they have corrupted. They have corrupted themselves. Their spot is not the spot of his children, of God's children. They are a perverse and crooked generation. Well, on that sad note, we're going to have to end today's study, and Lord willing, we'll pick up during our next study.
Thank you for joining us today for Searching the Scriptures. Until next time, to God be the glory.